Hello, Meghan Murphy. Lovely to see you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm okay, thank you. It's near my bedtime actually. I mean, the time difference is a bit deep for me.
I forgot about that. I'm sorry.
All right, all right.
I'm quite nocturnal.
Yeah,
But I mean obviously it's the afternoon here. But yeah, I mean I'm usually up till like 3 a.m. most
really.
nights, unfortunately. Yeah. I mean
Okay. I need my beauty sleep. I love sleep.
I get my beauty sleep. I'm just I do that by staying up very late and then by not waking up in the morning.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. Um, yeah, thank you so much for speaking to me today. Like, I'm a massive fan of all your work. I think it's incredibly important. I think I discovered you through Robert Jensen, who I'm also a big fan of, and yeah, and I love all the stuff that Feminist Current puts out. I think it's very provocative and important. Would it be all right if you just explained a little bit about how that came about and what your motivations for starting it were?
Right. So I started Feminist Current back in 2012. And I mean, mainly I started it because there were all these things that I wanted to talk about and write about, and I had no platform to do that. There was nowhere for me to really put my work and my ideas. Um, Partly because when you're a new writer and you haven't broken into journalism or media in general, it's difficult to get published. But also because all of the feminist outlets that existed were, I mean, they're primarily in the US. There was, I mean, the media landscape in Canada is tiny in general. And there weren't really any specifically feminist outlets, period. But the kinds of writing that you could do on feminism in North America were limited to it was limited to third wave feminism, or liberal feminism as it's called somehow. So there was nowhere to put like a critique of the sex industry. um, there were so few people outside of a few radical feminist bloggers here and there, um, and journalists like Julie Bindel, or radical feminists from the second wave who had written books and stuff like that. But as far as online publications, there was no one really writing about like the Nordic model, criticizing pornography from a feminist perspective, um, analyzing objectification from a radical feminist perspective, and criticizing third wave politics. So when I first started writing, it was around the time when Slut Walk started, for example, and that was like 2011. And I was following what was going on their Facebook page and the kinds of um, blog posts that they were publishing. And obviously I was watching the actual Slut Walk marches themselves, and it just didn't quite
Sorry,
sit right with me.
for
Do you
those
know
who
what?
don't know, what is the slut walk?
Oh, right. Yeah. That was like a big thing back in those days. It sort of dwindled a little bit. There's still kind of happening here and there, though, actually, and in various places in the world, but it's not as a big deal as it was. So Slut Walk was in response. It started in Canada, actually, in Toronto. And it was started by some university students in response to a police officer who'd said something, I can't remember the exact quote anymore, but something to the effect of like, maybe if you don't want to be sexually assaulted, you shouldn't be going out in slutty clothes. Those aren't his exact words, but that was the kind of sentiment. And so these young women decided to do a slut walk. And they were like, no one deserves to be raped, even no matter what they're wearing, no matter what their sexuality is or sexual behavior is, whatever. Which is a fine message. There's nothing wrong with that message, but it very quickly shifted into a um, they sort of launched themselves as being opposed to second wave feminist politics and radical feminist politics. They were, pro pornography, pro prostitution, pro BDSM. They, didn't make any connection between the objectification of women, and which is obviously very much tied to the sex trade, and violence against women, which to me seemed like, that seems like an obvious thing to me. It's easier to be violent, or to degrade somebody who you don't see as a full human being, who you only see as an object for your own pleasure or use or whatever. But anyway, so nobody was speaking critically about Slutwalk, and I think I was the first one to actually write anything critical about Slutwalk on my blog. So it was stuff like that, and then very quickly after that, I started writing about pornography and prostitution, and so was immediately, controversial and getting attacked from the left, from sex work advocates, from advocates for the sex trade, from other third wave feminists, from American liberal feminist bloggers, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, fascinating that that you get attacked for pointing out such important things. So I just winding back a little bit. Do you think it's intentional that there hasn't been much second wave sort of publications in the mainstream, and more of a promotion of the liberal feminism?
I don't know if it's intentional in that it's some kind of like conspiracy, but I think it's intentional in that, this is the popular ideology, and people these days are very afraid to push back or go against the grain. People don't want to challenge ideas that are going to get them in trouble in their industries. So if you work in media, you learn what you can say and what you can't say, and who you can talk to and who you can't talk to. And people are scared of their friends, to be honest. People are afraid to challenge ideas that their friends are promoting, and they're afraid to have those kinds of conflicts and discussions. So I think, and I also think that third wave feminism is kind of the cool feminism, the cool girl fit. Like, it's not cool to be like a second wave feminist. It's not cool to like challenge the sex industry. You're supposed to be down with that. Like, if you're a cool girl who's like sexually liberated, you're supposed to talk about pornography and prostitution and BDSM and objectification as something that's empowering. And that's an individual choice. And to criticize that means that you're a prude, you're uptight, you don't like sex, you don't like men, you don't like your body, you're not confident, you're maybe ashamed of sex. None of those things are true, of course, because, and that doesn't even make any sense, because of course, the reason why a lot of women would be critical, I mean, the reason why I'm critical in part, of things like objectification and pornography and the sexualization of violence and degradation, is because I do like I have relationships with men. I am heterosexual. Like, I like sex, and I don't want to participate in these practices. They don't make me feel good, and I don't like, when I was a younger woman, I felt that pressure to participate, and it made me uncomfortable, and I didn't always understand why. And then when I sort of discovered radical feminist analysis and second wave feminism, I started to understand why, and started to realize, like, oh, I don't have to like pornography. I don't have to participate in this. Like, I don't need to pretend to be down with these like pornographic versions of sex. Like, this is not what sex needs to be. And And then, of course, moreover, I was concerned about all the abuse and violence that happens in the sex trade. Um, but I think, I mean, obviously, there's financial interests at play in all of this too, because the porn industry is this massive multi-billion-dollar industry, and so that lobby is powerful, and has a lot of sway and puts a lot of pressure um on, I guess, I mean, you'll know if you start criticizing prostitution and pornography, you'll start getting attacked by people in the sex work lobby and people who are actually in the porn industry, people who are profiting from those industries. And so they have good reason to try to shut down those kinds of critiques, because they're trying to sell their product, and they don't want people disrupting that. They don't want people creating or advocating laws that will prevent them from profiting. And that's, of course, part of what feminists who are critical of these industries do. We talk about behavior and ideology and individual practices and how we treat one another and how objectification impacts women and how they feel about themselves and impacts our sex lives and our personal relationships. But we also talk about changing law and policy in order to attempt to prevent exploitation and abuse.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, completely agree with you. It's really interesting what you say about this desire to be cool as well, and I think that that's a big thing, and especially when you're a young person as well, and the peer pressure that you can face. I think for whatever reason in my head, I suddenly thought of how what's cool changes as well, right? So like back in the 90s, it was cool for hip hop to be a bit more like anti-establishment and whatnot, whereas nowadays hip hop's kind of, it's cool to talk about drugs and capitalism and flashy cars and whatnot. Though obviously there was a
Totally.
bit of that back in the day, but I was also just wondering if maybe have your views changed at all since starting up Feminist Current?
Definitely. And yeah, I mean, this isn't the question you asked, but I just wanted to, I think that you're right. Like, it's like hip hop in the 90s. There used to be like a lot of like underground hip hop that was like critical of like capitalism and, you know, the man and whatever. And now you're right, like it's fully embraced consumerism and fully embraced objectification. Like back in the 90s, there were like female rappers who were dressed in like big, huge, baggy clothes and were like legit and taken seriously in the way that the male rappers were. And now, like, I think almost all women in hip hop, that maybe with a few exceptions, are completely objectified and out in like, their underwear essentially, and have tons of plastic surgery and have like so much makeup on and blah 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 blah. So it's interesting how it seems that we've just sort of given up in some ways. But anyway, that's an aside. And so your question was,
Just have your views changed since
oh
starting
right,
up
okay,
the platform?
yes, okay. I think that, I mean, I think that when I discovered radical feminism, I felt like it was the answer to everything. So I was like, wow, like this all makes sense. And I felt very empowered by that analysis. And I felt like finally I could articulate what I had been feeling, but maybe didn't fully understand or didn't feel empowered to talk about. And so that's really important. But I think that I sort of was so enthusiastic that I limited myself and painted a more black and white picture of a divide both between left and right, and like politically, and between the radical feminists and the liberal feminists. And I tended to paint anyone who didn't see things the same way as I did as an enemy. You don't believe what I believe, you don't support my politics, like you're bad and you're wrong. And I think I was a lot more stubborn about my analysis and a lot more ideologically rigid. Um, and I tended to be kind of less forgiving of men, to be honest. Like if you use pornography, if you objectify women, you're like a bad person. And it's not that I don't still have those kinds of critiques. It's just that I think that we need to work with people and that people are more nuanced than that. And I'm sort of more interested in the conversation and about trying to understand where people are coming from and trying to talk to them so that they understand where I'm coming from. I don't see any kind of like binary divide between left and right anymore. I'm not so attached to attaching myself to the left. Like I was very much that kind of person who was like, I'm left wing, the left is right, or the left is right and the right is wrong. And I didn't even engage with people who I considered to be right wing or libertarian or liberal or whatever I called them. Anybody who wasn't like a Marxist or a socialist, I didn't really want anything to do with. And I think that's pretty silly. Partly because the left doesn't support our feminist politics at all and have wholly abandoned women. They promote this idea of sex work as work, a job like any other, and a potentially empowering job for women. They've gotten fully on board with this gender identity ideology thing. They won't even engage in conversation with feminists, with women like me. They degrade and deride and silence and smear women like me. So I don't really have much interest in attaching myself to political groups like that. And just, I didn't understand at that time that, yeah, the world isn't black and white. People aren't good and bad. People aren't left and right. People have various ideas and are learning as they go. And most people are trying to do good. And just because you don't agree with me or see things the same way I do, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you see things differently. So there's that. I think that I was definitely not advocating free speech. I wasn't advocating against free speech per se, but I just didn't really see that as an important issue. So I just didn't really bother talking about free speech ever. I don't think I really understood why free speech is such an important principle, partly because Canadians don't really make a big deal about free speech as they do in America, for example. I think that we kind of take it for granted, to be honest. And now I see free speech as like an incredibly important thing. So I try to talk about it and advocate it as much as I can. And I support free speech for everyone, anyone. People who I think are saying incredibly offensive things have the right to say those things. I want to hear everyone's opinion, to be honest. I want to have these conversations. I don't want to silence anybody. I don't want to censor anybody. I don't want to shut anybody down. So I think, yeah, and I guess when I was younger, I think I felt more conflicted or maybe guilty about heterosexual practices. So not only just literally being in heterosexual relationships with men, but things like makeup and beauty products and trying to look attractive in general. Because I've always kind of participated in that to a certain extent. Wanting to look attractive to men, I guess, just like basically. And I sort of felt like guilty and conflicted and for a long time. And eventually I was just like, oh, I don't care. Like, I'm not going to be the kind of person who goes around as third wave feminists do, pretending that makeup is like a feminist choice or like trying to look attractive is somehow like a political statement or that self-objectification is is feminist or any of those things, but I also am just gonna like live my life and not like feel guilty about who I am and what I want to do and what I like. So, you know, I'm part of this culture too, whether we like it or not. I think that you can both challenge the beauty industry and the messages that it sends to women, which are harmful, and be critical of things like, you know, the reality that there's tons of toxic chemicals in beauty products that cause cancer, but also not like spend your life feeling bad about the fact that you wear eyeliner. I mean, you should try to find eyeliner that doesn't have toxic chemicals in it, I would say.
Yeah.
If you're ever looking for an eyeliner, if you're ever looking for, you know, makeup tips, I can help you out because I've done quite a bit of research into trying to buy makeup that doesn't contain carcinogens.
Okay. Well, maybe if I transition to the other gender, I might need.
Yeah, totally. Hit me up.
So yeah, loads of really interesting points to unpack there. Firstly, I'll just mention that I think yes, it's really important to account for the nuances, and I think it's brave and bold to be able to go on that journey and slowly account for nuances. Like I think in myself as well, when I first came across radical feminism, I felt a little bit like it had all the answers. It was like, oh, like how we be missing that this is gonna fix the problem.
All the problems. It'll fix all of the problems.
Yeah.
Sorted it out.
Yeah, which might actually still be true, but I think it was a matter of having to just reconcile with the fact that and this isn't actually excusing men, but realizing that a lot of the badness that men do comes from the fact they're actually so emotionally destroyed in their childhood or for whatever reason, that they literally lock themselves into these like mental boxes where they just fall into negative cycles. And I also think it's important to, like you said, account for ways. Like for me as a man, I think I almost got to a point where I was feeling guilty for listening to like hip hop that had some misogyny in it, and I had to kind of realize that hang on, I grew up on that genre. Just because I'm listening to certain lyrics, it doesn't mean that I like condone that behavior. Is there that space for the kind of the duality and the nuance, if you know what I mean?
Totally. And because I mean, I'm a big hip hop fan. So I listened to hip hop all through the 90s, and I still listen to hip hop. I still listen to the hip hop that I was into in the 90s. Actually, there's not actually that much new hip hop that I'm into. There's like a few things here and there, but I'm still sort of engaged in that 90s and maybe early 2000s hip hop. But, you know, I listened to super misogynist rap music. I also listen to that like underground, like political stuff too. But I mean, hip hop is like a fairly sexist, you know, to generalize, misogynist genre. I mean, there's lots of misogyny in like classic rock too and other genres. But it does you do have to like deal with that conflict. It's like, do I have to stop listening to all this music because, you know, this guy is objectifying women or saying like insulting things about women? And, you know, for me at the end of the day, I was just like, like, am I gonna reject all media and culture? Like, I like this music. I'm not going to take his message at face value. Some of those artists I had to kind of stop listening to because I just couldn't deal with it anymore at a certain point. Like I'm not like listening to like Too Short anymore. But actually that's not true. Every once in a while I'll still listen to Too Short, but I'm not as much as I was when I was like, I don't know, 18 years old and singing along to all the words about like pimping or whatever. Anyway, I'm getting way off topic here, but like even, you know, you sort of I think it's okay in many ways to separate the artist from the art. You know, I still watch, you know, movies that have directors that are problematic. Obviously, I still listen to hip hop that's like sexist, or, you know, hip hop artists who've engaged in misogyny in other parts of their lives. Like I just don't. First of all, people change. So I can't assume that what this guy was saying when he was like 19 years old is still what he believes now. You know, I said lots of horrible misogynist things when I was like young, when I was 17, 18, about other women. Like I called other women like bitches and hoes and all that stuff too. And I wouldn't engage in that kind of behavior now. So I don't know. I think we can be sort of more forgiving of people and be a little bit more nuanced in our approach and not feel like we have to have perfect politics in our personal lives. Like we're also complex, flawed people. Like I don't think feminist thoughts all the time. I don't say feminist things all the time at all. I say, you know, like I think all sorts of, I'm sure all sorts of like sexist thoughts pop into my head on a regular basis. I mean, I'm a human being like anybody else.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, it's super important to think of the world that way, while while not excusing and forgiving some of the bullshit, I suppose. Yeah, so you mentioned it earlier as well, a little bit about free speech and how your views have maybe changed on that a little bit. Um, Obviously, is that because you were taken off Twitter, and also what is cancel culture becoming like a buzzword, I guess, is my question.
I think the cancel culture is becoming a buzzword. I mean, anything that we kind of oversay ends up becoming a buzzword and becomes like jargony and becomes like annoying. I'm also trying to find new ways to talk about virtue signaling, because I feel like I just say the word or the term virtue signaling over and over and over and over again. And once you do that, things sort of like lose meaning. So the same thing is happening to cancel culture. I mean, the free speech issue, it was partly because of what was happening to me in terms of my attempts to talk about gender identity ideology. You know, I couldn't get published anywhere. I wanted to write critically about Bill C-16 in Canada, which was our gender identity legislation, which was passed back in 2016 or 2017. And I couldn't. I was being censored and silenced and so on and so forth. Another reason why it was important and necessary to have my own platform. I mean, I was like, thank God I have Feminist Current, because I literally wouldn't be able to publish these ideas anywhere else. I wouldn't be able to have this conversation. But it was also that, I was seeing feminists shut down other people and conversations and ideas in a way that I found frustrating, because I was like, well, I want to talk about this stuff. I want to hear what this person has to say. Maybe I won't agree with them, or maybe what he's saying is bad, but I don't think that just announcing that he's evil and shutting him down, or she's evil and shutting him down, and just wholly dismissing them as a human being and all of their ideas because they don't totally agree with you, I don't think that's productive or healthy. And I don't think that's going to help us and our analysis. Like, I was starting to feel intellectually bored because I was starting to feel limited in what I could talk about and the ideas I was allowed to expose myself to, the people I was allowed to have conversations with. And and I was trying to ask questions and talk about issues, and I was getting shut down just for wanting to talk about this stuff. I would be like, well, what about this guy? What about this? Like, are we sure about this? And people were like, no, like, you can't ask that. Like, are you moving to the right? I'm like, no, I'm just trying to use my brain. Like, I'm just trying to have a conversation. Like, I don't want to just repeat mantras over and over and over again. Like, if we want to consider ourselves critical thinkers, then we have to actually think critically and challenge our own ideas and be challenged and learn about other ideologies and ideas, and hear from other people. We can't just talk within a silo and repeat the same thing back and forth to each other and disagree with each other. Like, first of all, it's boring, but then I think your brain becomes lazy. And then when challenged in the public sphere, you won't be able to contend with those challenges. It's like any practice. You have to keep doing it to it's like a sport, right? You have to keep doing it, or you become less skilled. Like, you're not able to compete. So yeah, I started to feel frustrated by feminism itself, and the kinds of conversations we were having and the kinds of conversations we're allowed to have. But at the same time, I was being shut down and censored out in the public sphere because of my views and the things I was trying to talk about in terms of gender identity ideology in particular. And even, you know, prior to that, like there had been this massive petition to have me fired from rabble.ca, which is a Canadian left-wing online news magazine, I suppose, that I worked for a little, maybe a few years, maybe even more than that, probably maybe more like 5 years or something like that. And I was writing for them, and my podcasts were going up there. And essentially a bunch of, you know, third wave feminists and people from the sex trade lobby over in Toronto were pissed that I kept writing all these things that were critical of the sex trade and critical of BDSM. And they were pressuring my employers to fire me for a really long time. So they didn't succeed, but, you know, I was experiencing these attempts to silence me long before I started talking about gender identity ideology. And, you know, this is the left. This is coming from the left. This is coming from people who consider themselves to be progressive. I mean, I don't consider them to be particularly progressive, and, you know, they're behaving in this authoritarian way. But I was just like, oh, this group that I'm supposed to be aligned with is so rigid, and everyone's scared of each other. You know, people are scared to associate with those who've been canceled. We weren't using the term cancel culture back then. This was like, yeah, 2015, 2016 or something like that. But same thing, you know, I was bad, I was banished, I was ostracized, and anybody who associated with me was also bad and should be punished and ostracized. And it's just such a unhealthy way of engaging with the world and with politics, I think.
Totally. And like you said, yeah, people asking the question, oh, are you right wing now? There is that kind of vibe, I think, that, you know, as someone who has done a lot of work around like racism and stuff, I do like, there's so much bullshit that comes out of the left that really makes me like question, like, hang on a minute, am I, whose side am I on, sort of thing? Though obviously it shouldn't even be a matter of sides. With relation to getting off Twitter, it'd just be really interesting to hear whether you have spoken to trans people since, and if there's anything they've said that has changed your mind about anything. And I know you don't hate trans people as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been in touch with lots of trans people. I've done events with and interviewed young women who detransitioned, so who transitioned when they were teenagers and went on testosterone, and, you know, realized 2 or 3 years down the line that, you know, oh no, I am female, I'm just a lesbian, or I'm just gender non-conforming, or I just, you know, felt uncomfortable when I started going through puberty and started being objectified. Like, I just didn't like wearing dresses. And in our culture today, if you're a girl and you're rejecting femininity, and you feel like you don't fit, or maybe you hate your body, or you don't feel comfortable going through the process of puberty, which, like, I don't know, does any kid feel comfortable going through puberty? Like, it sucks. Like, it's really confusing, and especially for girls, because when you start to go through puberty, you start getting sexually harassed and objectified and maybe, you know, sexually abused by adult men. It's not a pleasant experience. And you know, so it makes sense that girls would maybe want to reject their female bodies. But instead, in our culture, they're told, oh, you're probably actually a boy. Like, actually, here, you should take these hormones. You should go on puberty blockers, which will ensure your body doesn't develop properly, and maybe you're sterilized for life. Maybe you should get surgery and, like, cut off your body parts, which also destroys your body for life. It's just like, it's such a dangerous thing. And I just feel awful for people who transition, to be honest. I talked to somebody just yesterday, and I actually, I don't know if I don't think she still identifies as like a trans man. It seems like she identifies now as a lesbian. And totally forgotten her name, so I'm just gonna look it up. I don't even know if she uses him pronouns or her pronouns, to be honest. I didn't ask. Um, but sorry, just give me 2 seconds. Oh my god, I have the worst memory in the entire world. Um, okay, anyway, I'm not gonna be able to figure this out, so I'll figure it out later. Anyway, I was talking to her, and it's just like she, you know, she fully transitioned. Like, she got all of the surgeries, like phalloplasty, mastectomy, has been on hormones for a long time, and it destroyed her life. Like, those surgeries are awful. Those surgeries are brutal. They're extremely painful. They're very dangerous. It's experimental still. Like, they still don't really know what they're doing, and they don't treat it as such. Trans people who identify as transgender, are told this is what's going to solve all their problems, and this is what's going to make them feel happy and comfortable and fulfilled in their lives. And it's not true. They're being sold this lie that destroys their entire lives. Like, you can't enjoy sex anymore. Like, you can't you're sterile, obviously. Like, you can't go back once you transition. Hormones destroy your body too, and they up your chances of getting cancer, for example. And I don't think that people who are transitioning are not given the full story and all the information, and they're not told about all the potential dangers and harms down the line. But also people who are supporting trans ideology and advocating for trans people, supposedly, these people who believe that they're doing this really good thing by supporting the transition of children, which they call supporting trans kids, by promoting gender identity ideology and laws and policies. I think that what they're doing is actually really harmful. Like, this is really destroying people's lives, and no one's allowed to talk about it. Not me, but also not the people who transition and regret it down the line. Like, they're silenced too. Those stories aren't being told in the media. And I just, like, yeah, like I've talked to people who I guess identify as transsexual, so men who identify as transsexual, and but who are not, who aren't the trans activists who are going around saying that I should be murdered. Obviously, the transsexuals who are supportive of women who are critical of gender identity ideology. And they'll just be like, I don't know why I'm like this, I don't know why I feel like this, but this transitioning did make me feel better. I also know that I'm not a female, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm actually a woman like you are. And so, fine, like, do what you need to do to be happy in your life. I think for most people, transitioning is a dangerous, harmful thing. But I mean, if you're an adult, you really, really want to do it, like, fine, go ahead and do it. Like I said, like, I don't hate those people just because, I can't relate or whatever. But it's the problem is that we're being told that there's only one way to talk about this, that this is all positive, that there's such a thing as being born in the wrong body, which there's not, that it's possible to change your sex, that if you don't relate to gender stereotypes, you're probably actually the opposite sex. Like, there's this clip going around online from the Babysitters Club, which is a series on Netflix, and it's based on a series of books that I used to read obsessively when I was a kid. And I actually started a Babysitters Club when I was like 11 or 12, based on this series and books. But so there's a TV series now on Netflix based on these books called The Babysitters Club. And I guess there's like a trans kid character now, because this is the modern version. And the storyline is just so sexist. Like, the clip that's been going around on Twitter is like, one of the babysitters is at the hospital with this little trans kid, and there's two doctors that come in, and they keep referring to this boy as he and him. And this babysitter is like, oh God, this is so troubling. What am I gonna do? So she is like young teenager, walks the doctors out of the room. She's like, can I talk to you two for a minute? And walks them out of the room and explains that they need to refer to this boy as she. Can't you see clearly she's a girl? She has long blonde hair and she's wearing a frilly dress. And can you please give her the pink robe instead of the blue robe, you transphobes? Like, obviously she wants the pink robe because she's a girl. And it's just like, what kind of like world, like, is this the 50s? Like, you should know that this is a girl because she likes pink. It's like, I hated pink when I was a kid. Like, I hated girly things when I was a kid. I didn't want to wear dresses. I didn't want to wear dress shoes. When I was in ballet class, which I hated, I wore like the boys' outfit. Like, I had like a black leotard and like black ballet shoes. I'm like, I'm not wearing this girl shit. So, like, I guess I was really a boy too. Like, it's so, and it's just, I mean, it's so offensive that it's like, oh, these kids need to explain to medical doctors what a girl is. Like, but anyway, I just, it's such a regressive sexist ideology, and it's so harmful and dangerous, and anybody who says what I'm saying is, I'm somehow the bad guy. Like, I'm the hateful, regressive, I don't know, bigot.
Yeah, which you're not, but I do wonder if this actually ties in a little bit with what we were talking about coolness, and I'm thinking about herd mentality, and I actually sometimes wonder if, like, when someone like Daniel Radcliffe comes out to stand up for trans people because of J.K. Rowling's comments, for me that just sounds like someone who wants to stay cool and relevant, like, and not to take shots at Harry Potter. I love Harry Potter, but yeah, it feels like when something becomes cool and there's a certain way you're supposed to think, to sort of think against it becomes heresy, and it is very strange. And I think you're making really interesting points actually about the people we don't hear about, like those who detransition, right? I don't see headlines about that, so that sounds really concerning. I'm really interested to just know how the hell you fucking have dealt with all this shit and how you stay sane and positive through all the backlash you've had.
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, I searched through my email. The woman that I was talking about who transitioned and who I talked to yesterday about her horrific experience is Scott Nugent. And she's interested in advocating on behalf of trans people and working with gender critical feminists. So anyway, you can look her up on Twitter. And I don't identify as a gender critical feminist. I don't really identify as anything per se. I just identify as a person who likes to have like rational conversations. So that's why I keep using quotations around the term gender critical feminist. Anyway, I have dealt with this by I don't know, like, it's been pretty stressful. Like, I've always had a pretty strong friend group. I maintain an active social life, and so that helps. Like, one of my main coping mechanisms for dealing with all the stress that comes along with my work is literally just to like leave the computer and go out with my friends and go do other things and talk about other things, try to get away and like, go to the island, travel. Like, I mean, most of my travel is work related, to be honest, so not particularly relaxing, but I do try to, it sounds, I don't know, privileged, and I guess it is a privilege to go on vacation, but I have to, like, I have to leave. Like, I have to leave the city, I have to leave my computer, I have to go away from these conversations because I'm just enmeshed in them all the time. And this past year was particularly stressful because I was doing all these events and I was getting protested by hundreds and hundreds of people, and it was really hard because, I mean, the events are great. Like, I genuinely really enjoy doing them. I find them very galvanizing. I really like meeting people and talking to people. It's really inspiring. I think that it's people are really brave just to show up and attend these events. So I have a lot of respect and gratitude towards these people. A lot of, women will just come alone. Women have come to our events in Vancouver and had to walk past protests that include their friends, so their friends are, yelling at them just because they want to attend this event and hear what we have to say, or maybe participate in the conversation. So it's hard, but because some of these events were happening in my city, we organized several events here in Vancouver. It got really complicated with my friends, because their friends would be saying Meghan's like a horrible transphobe who's responsible for like violence against trans people, which is crazy, of course. She has blood on her hands, she hates trans kids, like saying all this really horrible, awful stuff about me. I mean, they've said much worse things about me, and none of it's true. But my friends get pressured to ostracize and abandon me, and some of them did. Some of them did feel like the pressure was too much and they didn't want to deal with being bullied by their friends all the time, and they're just like, well, fuck Meghan, like, this is not worth it. And when I see what people who used to be my friends, or who are friends of friends, who are acquaintances that I've known in Vancouver for a long time, will say about me, or the comments that they'll like that will be saying horrible things about me online. And sometimes I don't care, like if it's not somebody that's important to me, it's like, okay, fine, whatever, like you're not an important part of my life. But when it actually is a friend or someone who knows you, it's just like, okay, like, do you really believe this about me? Like, do you really believe that I would want to hurt anybody? That I'm trying to do something bad here? Or do you believe that I'm trying to do something good here, that I genuinely have concerns for women and girls, that this women's rights thing that we're talking about really does matter to me? Like, that I'm worried about the consequences of this ideology and these practices on people. When it's like, when I've had boyfriends, like it's stressful for them too as well. They see this shit about me online, they get pressured from their friends. And and a lot of my friends, I mean, the positive side is that you end up with new friends. Like, you'll make new friends and they already know what you're about and they're already on board, and they're not going to bail on you. Or you figure out which of your friends have courage and integrity and which don't. And I don't know that you want to be friends with the kinds of people who will bail on you because of outside pressure, because they care about their popularity or their status in Vancouver. It's like, man, you're 40 years old. Like, stop worrying about what other people think. This is like, grow up. Like, when you're like 20 and you're like, your peer group is your entire world, and what other people think about you and say about you is everything. Fine, but you're an adult now. Like, don't deal with these kinds of bullies. Like, don't, like, anybody who's trying to pressure you to abandon someone or stop being friends with somebody because they don't like them or they don't like their politics or whatever, they have like bad boundaries, and you shouldn't be friends with that person. Like, if somebody tried to pressure me to stop being friends with somebody else, I'd be like, are you 12? Like, fuck off. Like, I don't want you in my life. Like, this is a sign of somebody who doesn't have healthy boundaries, and who's kind of like immature, to be honest. Like, I don't want to engage with bullies. But I mean, yeah, it's just, it feels bad, like it's hard, but it's also sort of like, well, you lose respect for those people. And like, yeah, do you want people in your friend group or your circles who you don't respect, or who would rather be liked than stand up for what's right and what's true, or stick up for their friends, or have some integrity, or simply be willing to have those conversations? Like, the kinds of people who do tend to abandon you over things like this, over your politics or beliefs around gender identity or whatever, also tend to be the people who are too afraid to have a direct conversation with you about it, to sit down and be like, hey, what do you actually think about this? This is what I think. These are my concerns about, what you say or what's being said about you. so that we can sort things out. They just kind of like ghost, right? And you're like, oh, I guess we're not friends anymore. I guess I'll assume that this is why. Like, thanks for talking to me about it, buddy. Like, so, and I mean, yeah, like those things are more stressful, even I think, than being protested. Like, what my enemies say about me, is of less concern to me than what people close to me do and say. It's obviously frustrating to hear so much about yourself that's simply not true and is so like horrid. But it's the impact on your personal relationships, I think, is the real challenge. And so yeah, there's positive and negative things to that, which is that, you know, I'm really grateful to the friends that I do have who stick around and who are supportive, and even if they don't agree with me, who are, you know, willing to have conversations with me that are difficult, or just not, you know, we're like, okay, we don't agree on this, let's move on, there's other things that we can talk about and that we like about each other. This is not the end of the world that we don't completely agree about gender identity.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, definitely separates the true friends from the fake friends.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, we kind of touched on this idea of whether this is all intentional or not, right? And I think it's really interesting because the whole trans thing being thrown on you as well is very undermining to the work that you do for women and girls, right? It's like a brilliant distraction from like you said, right? Like people would, you know, be like, oh, did you hear what she said about trans people? Yeah, but have you heard what she's doing for women and girls? It's like, that's why I sometimes wonder how much of this is just like top down media backed by billionaires, corporations, just like, you know, dividing and ruling essentially, man. I think if everyone is fighting over identity politics and whatever, it actually takes a lot of attention off like the 1% and the 0.1% who like are often behind these big like media organizations. But maybe I'm crazy, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if it were a conspiracy, it would be a really good conspiracy. Like, it's like way to derail the entire feminist movement and into having to argue about the fact that biological women exist. Like,
Yeah.
like, what is a woman's right if there's no such thing as a woman? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a great, it's the most perfect backlash. I could have never imagined a better backlash.
Yeah, it's a tough battle. I thought I was gonna, I don't want to keep you too long. I was gonna maybe see if your views on like racism has changed at all, and maybe in how that relates to feminism. And then lastly, I was just gonna ask you about what might sound very trivial and patronizing, but like what men can do today to improve themselves.
Oh, I mean, I think all men should go to therapy.
Okay. My therapy right here, to be honest.
Oh, good. Okay. I'm glad that I'm helping.
Oh,
Um,
oh, you're back. The sound went off for a
oh,
second.
okay. Okay. I mean, I don't know that my views about racism have changed per se, but I mean, I guess one thing that I can say about the conversation around racism and feminism is that I feel like I mean, intersectionality is a word that's thrown around a lot. And I think that unfortunately intersectionality, which should just be the idea that, you know, women are impacted differently based on class and race. You know, we women aren't only impacted by patriarchy. That's not the only thing that shapes our lives. It's not even, I mean, it's a primary thing that shapes our lives, but I would also argue that something like poverty is going to shape your life equally, if not more so, than your status as a woman. You know, a woman who has money is gonna have a lot more, you know, ability to move around freely in this world. You know, like having financial autonomy is a really big deal, and that was a major part of the feminist fight, of course. Like, you know, the first wave feminists who fought for women to be able to own property and to not, you know, to be a person, to not sort of just become their husbands, essentially, as far as their legal status goes when they get married. And therefore, the fact that they would literally lose everything if their husband left them. And, you know, being poor is going to make you not only kind of beholden to a man. So, you know, if you're in a situation of domestic violence, for example, it's so much harder, if not impossible, to leave if you have no money, if you can't go rent another apartment, if you can't go stay in a hotel, if you don't have a vehicle, etc. But it's going to make you more vulnerable to things like prostitution. You're going to end up in more vulnerable situations, and you're not going to be able to get out of those situations so easily. And obviously, you know, women are racialized, and we can see the way that race also functions within the context of the sex trade. I mean, it's so interesting that all of these people who claim to be intersectional feminists and to be like fighting racism also have zero critique of pornography and the like extreme racism. Like the pornography is like the most racist place in the world. You know, women are literally categorized by race by all these super racist, sexist stereotypes. And they have nothing to say about that. They have nothing to say about the fact that women of color are overrepresented in the sex trade, that like in Vancouver, Indigenous women and girls are overrepresented in the sex trade. And those are the women and girls who aren't going to be like the high-end escorts. They're going to be the women who are just getting abused out on the street and, you know, re-traumatized over and over and over and over again, and have very little access to support to try to escape that. But I guess unfortunately that term intersectionality has just been used, I think, as a way to kind of derail the feminist movement, to be honest. Like, it's like you're not really allowed to focus on just women anymore. Like, if you just talk about women, somebody jumps in and says, intersectionality, like, what about trans? Like, what about racism? What about all this stuff? Nobody talks about class anymore, so I can't even say that people would jump in and be like, what about class? Because nobody seems to give a fuck about class, like, which is interesting that nobody wants to talk about, like, poverty and, like, how much that impacts women's lives or everyone's lives. Anyway, I'm sort of like going off on like a tangent that probably doesn't really answer your question, but I will say that, you know, unfortunately, I do think that intersectionality is used as a way to derail the feminist movement and to have conversations that are focused specifically on women and sex-based rights and women's needs in this world. And yeah, as for what men can do, I mean, to better themselves.
Sorry, is that I almost wanted to ask, is that an unfair question to like ask you what men should do, right? Is it do we need to figure our shit out?
No, I love to tell men what to do. I know, you know, that annoys me because a lot of feminists, a lot of radical feminists do respond to men in that way. Like, you figure it out. I'm not here to educate you. Like, don't waste my time. Like, this isn't about you. Like, shut up. And I hate all that stuff because it's totally about men. And of course I want to talk to men about all this stuff. I talk to men about all this stuff all the time. Like, what is the point of doing any of this stuff if I'm not going to talk to men about this stuff? I mean, men are people too, first of all. They're my friends. Like, I have a lot of male friends. I have male partners. Like, why would I not want to engage males in these conversations? And I don't want to silence anybody. Like, I don't like this thing where it's like, sit down and shut up, you're white, sit down and shut up, you're a man, etc. Like, you don't identify within the specific category, so you have no say. Like, it's just not true. Like, everybody has a say. So, like, men, I mean, there's lots of things that men can do. I mean, one of my frustrations with men as this like sweeping stereotype about men is that I feel like women spend their lives kind of working on themselves. You know, we're the ones who go to therapy. We're the ones who read the self-help books or the relationship books. We're the ones reading the books about like feminism. And, you know, a lot of men sort of don't engage in that self-work, and I think that they really should, because it becomes really hard, honestly. Like, I guess, like, on a personal level, it's hard to have a relationship with a man who hasn't done the work, especially when you, as a woman who's been working on all her flaws to like fix herself for like 20 years. Like, women are very invested in the idea that they're flawed and wrong and need to be fixed, so we end up and you know, and because of the way that we're raised and socialized, women just, you know, they do feel more comfortable talking about their emotions and talking about their feelings and going to therapy and opening up, and thinking about like how they were raised and how that impacted their adult behavior and their adult relationships and the way that they engage with those around them. And we're socialized to be more empathetic to those around us. And that's not to say that all women are empathetic and that all men aren't empathetic. It's just that we're socialized to care about and think about how other people are feeling and how we're making other people feel, and more so than men are. And it's sort of just on a personal individual level, it just makes relationships with men challenging. But also, you know, like, I feel bad for men who feel like they can't talk about their feelings. Like, I often, like, when I witness conversations among men, or when I've talked to my boyfriends about the kinds of conversations they have with their male friends, I'm like, what do you guys talk about? Like, I'd be like, oh, how's your friend so and so doing? He broke up with his partner, is he okay? And my boyfriend will be like, what? Like, I don't know. I was like, did you not ask? Did you not say, hey, are you okay? How are you feeling? Like, it's just like, it's so sad. Like, I would die if I had to stuff all my feelings down and that I couldn't talk about this stuff with my friends. I feel bad for men who feel like they have to shut everything off and that they're kind of like alone in this world and they just have to fix things themselves, or they feel like they can't reach out, or they feel like they can't be open with people about what they're going through and experiencing. I don't think that's healthy, and it makes me feel sad, especially because, you know, a lot of boys experience so much violence and like bullying. You know, when my male friends tell me what they experienced when they were kids or in high school, I'm just like, Jesus, like, you were beat up every day on your way home from school. Like, that seems so traumatic to me. And this is just normal. This is just a normal part of life, and nobody can talk about it, and you can't talk about it, how it affected you. Like, it's hard for men to talk about their trauma and experiences as a kid. And it's hard for everybody to talk about their trauma and their experiences as a kid, but, you know, there's a particular struggle for boys and men because they're not supposed to be vulnerable, and they're not supposed to be the victims of abuse. Women are supposed to be the victims and men are supposed to be the perpetrators, and that's often the case. But then there's also the factor of men and boys being victims of other men, male perpetrators. And it just creates these like cycles of trauma and abuse, I think, that people don't heal from and deal with.
Yeah, I think therapy is the way. I think I'll pick that one.
I can send you some books. No.
I'm a big fan of Bell Hooks, actually. She was good. I recommend her, actually, for a lot of men. The Will to Change is a great book. And also, yeah, just quickly wheeling back to the racism thing. And, you know, the great thing about second wave feminism is that it had a critique of racism as well. And I completely see why you think intersectionality derails all of that stuff. Yeah, it makes sense. Lastly, where can I get one of those comfy fluffy things for my
Oh my God. I mean, this is just from like Costco. I'm afraid it's just a kind of cheapo synthetic sheepskin that I got from Costco, and it honestly, like, it's not even like a planned aesthetic. Like, this is what I want my YouTube video to look like. Like I said, it's just like this chair that I have is like a really ugly chair, so I just had to put something over it because this is the only spot in my tiny apartment that has like a semi-neutral background, you know, that isn't like a wall of books or the kitchen. So I had to use the space. This is the chair that's here. I just tried to mask its ugliness with my Costco synthetic sheepskin, and I'm glad that it's working, I guess.
I'm gonna invest in one. I'm gonna invest. But I'm glad it's synthetic as well, because I'm actually like a vegan, so
okay, yeah,
has to be synthetic.
My dog loves it too. My Chihuahua likes to like perch herself on top of it and lie on what she believes to be her sheepskin in the sun. So it's really hers, and I just borrow it for my YouTube videos.
Okay, cool. Don't fight with the Chihuahua about it. Thank you so much for talking to me today, Meghan. I think, yeah, you speak very well on all of these topics. You seem very like chilled out despite all the craziness and backlash you've had, and yeah, and I think you're important as well, because I think you're cool. I think it's important to be making these things like we talked about earlier. You know, it's not cool to have some of these views, and actually, like, why isn't it? You know, why is it cool to be so pro-consumerist or pro-pornography or whatever it is? I think one of the most important things about this struggle against all the fuckery in the world is trying to make it cool to be against it, you know?
Totally.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much for speaking to me, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks so much for reaching out, and I really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you so much for all the work that you do.
Thank you. All right.
Okay.
Take care.
Okay. Bye.